To the next part of the future of Monzo. I hope you all had a chance to eat something and get something to drink and are ready for the next round of amazing talks. So the next talk we're going to have is about how we think about design. Now, Monzo has always had aspirations of being a global business that operates in a lot of different countries. But what we have right now, it's not designed for that just yet. Now, some of you might know that we've recently started our first international expansion in the US, and the reason we picked the US is because a lot of the thinking and principles around the way they think about money is very similar to here in the UK, but we want to be in lots of countries where people think about money in lots of different ways. So, for example, what does a Monzo app look like in a country where cash is still king, for example? Now, this may seem like it's a while off, but we like to be prepared, so our designers are already thinking about these kind of things. So allow me to introduce our principal product designer, Xander Braid. Some of you may remember a couple of years ago an amazing blog post that we did at Monzo about designing money with mental health in mind. It went massively viral. It was one of our most popular blog posts of all time. Xander was the person behind that, and he's going to talk about this right now, so please give him a big round of applause. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Naji and the team for putting the event on today, Shoreditch Town Hall, for having us, and for coming out. It's great to see so many smiling faces. I'm going to be talking, when the clicker kicks in, here we go. All right, we're flashing through. I'm going to be talking about designing money. Designing money is pretty hard. It can be very fickle, very interesting, and very challenging. It works along many different axes. So when we're designing money, we are thinking about time and currency, lifestyle, debt, credit, vulnerability. There's a lot of things to consider. It's also a shared responsibility, because when I'm talking about designing money, I'm not necessarily talking about designing the interface that you see within the Monzo app. It's actually everything else that happens around that. It's the decisions that we make to help you understand, to educate you about your money. And it lies in the hands of business analysts, of customer support reps, designers like myself, but engineers, lawyers, the marketing team, chief financial officers, even people outside of the bank, so regulators, policymakers, auditors. It is a shared responsibility to ensure the way that we communicate what is happening with your money to you works. So hopping back in time a little bit. There we go. Hopping back in time a little bit. I joined Monzo early 2016. Some of you might have been customers back then. We had about 3,000 customers. We had just kind of promoted ourselves from being an alpha product to a beta product. And for those of you who aren't too familiar with software development, that basically means that you're still not ready for public consumption, still kind of in the oven. The card looked like this. It was a prepaid card, which meant that you had to add money to it to be able to spend. It wasn't a bank account, full current account. You'll see we had a different name, a different logo. That is another story for another time. And within the Monzo app, you could see your spending. So you could see what was happening on your Monzo card. And you could send money and you could receive money within the Monzo network. But that was basically it. It was very simple. And then you fast forward to today, and quite a lot has happened. We've done a few things. We've grown the team that's building the bank. We've grown our customer base. We now put on big events in town halls. And the actual functionality of Monzo, the functionality that you find within the app and the bank account, has grown massively. You can get your salary paid in, which you should do. But the reality is, the things that made Monzo work back in 2016, what was at the core of how Monzo worked and why it just kind of felt right, are the things that still persist to today. It's instant visibility, instant communication, and instant control around your money, knowing what is happening all the time what is going on, why things are changing. I actually think, in spite of all the things that we've built in the last few years, and we really have built some technology that I think has changed the way that people bank and the way that they understand their money, not just in the UK, but across the world. But the thing that remains most magical is the first time you use your Monzo card. After a lifetime with your legacy bank, and you go into a shop, or you go into a, quite frankly, mediocre hipster pizza place like me, and you spend on your card, you tap on the till, and just like that, a notification comes up. And you tap through the notification, and then you see that there's a logo, and there's the name of where you've just spent, and the amount, and the address, a map that you can interact with. You see that we've categorized it for you, and there's a way to add notes and receipts. It is money happening instantly. But I also think that we have it kind of easy. We are operating within a country and within a market where we can facilitate money happening instantly. We're building on top of an infrastructure and an economy that allows for us to send push notifications and allows for us to tell you exactly where you spent and give you this merchant information. We are working in a place where people do very commonly use their cards and are actually open to using a kind of so-called challenger bank. But that will not always be the case. It's going to get much harder. We're going to be operating in markets where there are very different financial systems, banking systems, and money cultures from our own. And as we spread across the world, the design problems, the product problems, and the challenges that we're going to have to solve grow massively. We won't be playing on this kind of easy field anymore. We will be having to go out and explore and understand the different ways that people use money across the world. And this really isn't to kind of put down the complexity of what we've had to do so far, and I do really understand that there are many absurdities and complexities with the UK's banking system. But we do have it pretty easy. So I have been thinking lately about what happens when we go further afield. And I want you to consider some of these use cases. And these are just kind of 4 use cases out of 4,000 that you could pluck out. And I want you to recollect the things that we said at the heart of Monzo's functionality. Instant visibility, instant communication, and instant control of your money. And then you try and apply them to just these 4, and you will never get all 3 with them. These 2 things collide. And I appreciate that you could also look at these cases and think, they might be edge cases, or non-cases, or just something we don't need to worry about for a really long time. But that's not true. I kind of want to pull out the top one. How would Monzo behave in countries and markets where there are multiple currencies actively used? So whilst researching this talk, I got to chat with a few people living in different countries across the world where cash is king. Cash is still predominantly used. One guy I spoke to, a guy called Dan, he's a designer, he lives in Romania. And he pays his rent in cash. Now, I am willing to bet that most people in this room pay your rent through probably a fixed bank transfer on the same day every month, same amount. So it will either go out as rent or to your mortgage provider, the same amount, and all you need to worry about is that there's enough money in your account to cover it. However, Dan, as I said, pays his rent in cash, and this means that come rent day, every month, he has to call up his landlord. He has to call up his landlord and say, hey, is it all right if I bring the rent money over? The landlord says, yes. Come on over. So Dan pops around. It's only 2 doors down, which is convenient, because previously he lived on the other side of town. But he pops over, hands in the cash. Thank you very much. See you next month. But the complexity comes in where in Romania there are 2 currencies actively used, and the contractual agreement that Dan has with his landlord, the rent amount that he pays, is in euros. But the most commonly used form of currency in Romania is the leu. And therefore, every month, he has to calculate, based on the exchange rate difference between the euro and the leu, how much he's going to have to pay in rent. He'll have to make that calculation and then bring the specific amount of cash over to his landlord or face a potentially awkward conversation. And while there isn't that much fluctuation between the 2 rates, it's still something to consider. And then you think of the complexity that comes with that versus the complexity of how we pay rent or how we pay our mortgage in the UK, and they're just so far apart. And the main thing that I want to call out with this is that Monzo is just not built for that yet. Like, there's no way we can make those two things work with the way that Monzo has been designed. So, from here, I kind of honed in on a more specific case, a more specific challenge that I wanted to try thinking about how we might solve. So how could we help users understand their money when 95% of their spending is in cash? How could we operate in a market when 95% of spending happens in cash, where your bills are going out in cash and your day-to-day spending is going out in cash? And what I really like about this is the first thing you could say is just screw it. Like, it doesn't work. Monzo is inherently digital and cash is inherently physical. There's no way that we can make these two things integrate properly. Which is, I mean, it's kind of fair. We would have to change quite a lot about the app. We'd have to make fundamental changes to make these two things combine. But the thing is, cash is still very, 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 very heavily used across the world, and it will be for a long time. So you couldn't even make the argument that you're optimizing for something that is eventually going to die out, that in, I don't know, a certain amount of years, 20, 30 years, there won't be any cash left on Earth. Maybe, but I don't know, you're kind of making a thin argument, I think. And these stats prove that it's still very, very heavily used. In Europe, it's not something that is happening very, very far away. In Europe, cash is used incredibly heavily, and people pay their bills in cash. Like, I can promise you, we have struggled for a very, very, very long time to make the way you pay bills within Monzo work, and that is just happening on your card. That's just happening in your bank account. When it's in cash, it's even more complex. So, I challenged myself to kind of think about this and try and get a little bit more specific. How could we solve this from a product experience perspective, a design perspective? And I'm going to do something which I'm slightly regretting now that I'm up on stage. I'm going to walk you through a few different design approaches for how we could solve this. Now, every week at Monzo, a group of 7 or 8 designers from our design team will get together and do a round of feedback. You'll show what you've been working on in the last week, and the rest of the team will have a chance to give you feedback. I realize I'm doing that here, but it is not 7 designers, it is hundreds of people in the town hall. So bear with me. So we're going to be trying to solve for this case. And I'm going to show you 3 different approaches, and they really are not perfect solutions. But the purpose of this is not to show you exactly how we would do it, but to show you how we would think about taking design decisions that might solve these problems. And what I mean by that, and what I mean by design decisions, is that every choice we make within the app, every change we want to make, comes with a set of benefits and trade-offs. It has a benefit, or multiple benefits, because otherwise you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't make that change if it didn't have some material benefit. But also, by touching something up here, it's going to harm something down here. It will have trade-offs. And that's how we make decisions, is we look at the different benefits and the different trade-offs for each approach we could take and evaluate what makes most sense. So I'm going to show you these 3 different approaches. We're going to look at them, and it's going to be quite fast. So I appreciate I'm asking you to take in quite a lot in one go. But I'll talk you through them. First approach. So bear in mind what we're trying to do. We're trying to make Monzo work for people who use cash for 95% of their spending. The first thing we could do is we could piggyback off of how cash withdrawals currently work. So if you look at this far left screen here, when you take money out of Monzo, you get a notification, you get a transaction that you've taken money out from an ATM. We could do the same approach, with the only difference being this add transaction button. So what this would allow you to do would be, within this cash withdrawal transaction, add sub-transactions in there so that you can track where you then went and spent that money that you withdrew the cash for. So in the middle screen, you can see you can set the merchant and then set an amount. And then over in the far right, you'll see there's a little tally of the different places you went and spent that cash that you withdrew. I'll give you a few seconds to look at it. All right. OK, so we got the first one. Number 2. Again, piggybacking off of something we currently do within the Monzo app, and creating what is essentially a cash pot. So you'll probably be familiar with pots, but it's a segmentation of your money, and representing that within the app. So you could keep one currency in there. And in a similar model to the last approach, manually add transactions so you can keep a timeline of them. You can adjust the balance manually as well. And you'll notice we're kind of doing things like graying out the balance in your list view and then graying out the balance within the home view, because we don't know for sure what the balance is going to be because it's kind of out of our hands. So that would be a cash pot. Give you a few seconds to take it in. All right. Number 3, cash tab. So this would be creating a permanent place within the Monzo structure where cash could live. And unlike the last 2 approaches, this would not be so much a timeline, but more of a digital representation of your wallet, where you could take note of the different currencies, the amounts that you have for each of them. We could potentially do fun little things like showing you a map to nearby ATMs and giving you somewhere to note down the different bills that you have that you're paying in cash. Okay, so we've seen those 3 different approaches. I appreciate you've only had really 60 seconds to look at each one, but I would love to put this to a vote. I would love to see who would take each of these different approaches, and then following that, we're going to walk through the different benefits and trade-offs to each one. So, can you raise your hand if you would go for number 1, the cash withdrawal? All right. Good amount, good amount. Number 2, cash pot. Another good amount. 3, cash tab. All right, honestly, it's about even, but with the cash tab a little bit shorter. So these 2 are our favorites. All right, so let's talk about some of the benefits and some of the trade-offs to each approach. Cash withdrawal. I really like that it's contained, it's relevant, it's in the right place, because we know for a fact that you've taken that cash out. We've got a place for it in the app already, and we are just giving you the kind of logical next step to be able to take note of your spending inside of there. It's all in the right place. It also feels appropriately done, and what I mean by that is that cash is manual, cash is out of our hands, quite literally. So it makes sense that in the Monzo app you have to manually add these transactions, that you are kind of keeping track of your spending in that way if you want to, but there's no harm if you don't. But then it runs into this very, very major flaw, which is it a transaction or is it a balance? So these are nondescript dollars. This isn't any specific country. I think it's actually Atlantis. But these are dollars, and you've taken out $100. Let's say you then add a transaction of $20. Does that 100 then become 80? Or does it persist? Is this like a fuel gauge, or is it a fixed amount? That's a major, major flaw in my eyes. And then also, how do you handle the timestamp? Because we're allowing you to add transactions, and they're taking the form of a timeline. They're coming one after the other. But there's no way that we can reliably know when they've happened, because we can't rely on you knowing the exact hour, minute, second in the same way that we do when you make a card payment. You also lose the transaction level detail. And what I mean by this is we're already inside of a transaction. It would be inappropriate to allow you to step one level deeper and then have all the things you get with a transaction, such as adding notes and splitting the bill. So we lose that here. And then obviously it's just really error prone. You can put anything in there. Cash pot. Yeah, I like that the mental model is the same as how we segment money across the rest of the app. It makes sense in the same way that you have your current account balance. You have pot and cash, and each one has a certain amount in it, and they're all split up. That makes sense. It's aligning with the mental model that we've trained our users to understand. And then you also get back the thing we lost when I was talking about sub-transactions. You get individual transactions here because we haven't gone one level deeper. So you still get all those things like adding to a shared tab, splitting the bill, adding notes, adding a receipt. And you also get the flexibility for multiple currencies. We're opening the door to allowing you to store balances in different currencies here, which could be very, very powerful. The issues. It's dumb, but not in the way that was beneficial in the last approach. And the reason is that we are giving the appearance that it will be just as smart as one of your pots or your regular feed, because it's the same shape, it's the same visual look as your feed and as your pots. So you would expect the same level of behavior and the same level of intelligence. But it's not there. Like, you have to manually update your balance by setting the amount at any given moment. You have to add in the transactions, same thing with setting the merchant. It's not smart, but it would make you feel like it's smart. And so therefore, you've got these things, your current account, your pot, and your cash balance, and they're all on the same level, but one of them is far worse than the others. And then with these last two, we're mixing up, or actually we're separating where the transactions live within the app. Right now, whenever you spend, you'll see it within your current account feed, all of the transactions. Whereas here, we're splitting that up, but not giving a place for everything to live together, your card transactions and your cash transactions. And also the same issue, how can it be a timeline? We don't know when any of these transactions happened. We could set the timeline up to be when you added the transactions into your feed, but again, that collides with how we do the timeline elsewhere. So, oh goodness, look at that. It's cut off. Who would have thought? All right, I'll explain it anyway, because I know what that top point is. It's actually the key point, but don't worry. Yes. So, all right, the top point is, have I got it in me? The right amount of attention. Thank you, everyone. The right amount of attention. What I mean for that is, let's go back to the original case that we're trying to solve for. These are users who are using cash for 95% of their spending. 95%. It would be appropriate to create a permanent place within the app that their cash can live. It doesn't need to be transaction-based. So in the last approach, the multiple issues I outlined where we don't know what the time was, we don't know when it's happening, we don't know what the order is, you don't really need that here. It's not a timeline, it's a wallet. So I think we can avoid that. And then also, it feels like the appropriate division between cash and card. You've got card in one place, cash here, they're inherently different, so let's give them a different place within the app. But then these last 3 points, they're all kind of one and the same. Is it worthwhile? Would you want to come back here once a week, once a day? Probably not. I mean, I'm sure we could introduce features that would make it more worthwhile, but it feels like we're introducing a major structural piece without such a good reason to, without a reason for there being return value. It's like putting up a room in your house. If you put up a wall, it's quite hard to knock it down. You need to get sledgehammers, and you need to get people in. You can't just easily push it over. It's going to cost money, and it's going to cost time. When you introduce a major structural piece, you have to be ready to commit to it. And then lastly, or second to last, we might not be promoting the right behavior. We know that when you spend on your Monzo card, it's going to be smarter and it's going to be better. But by giving so much affordance to cash, are we promoting the correct behavior? So going through all of those, I'm sure you will have noticed many, many more flaws than I outlined, and maybe some good things, some good opportunities too. And I'm not going to put this to a vote again, but I would actually be curious to know, is there anyone in the room who has changed their mind based on looking at the benefits and trade-offs? Okay, a handful. All right, so you're all actually pretty good designers then. You know what you're doing. But a handful of people. But the point of this isn't to show you the perfect approach. It's really not. As you will have seen, these are not ideal solutions and require a lot more work before we're even close to getting there. But the point that I'm getting at is actually that this is a process of learning. The only way for us to get there is through research, through developing a greater understanding of the users and the people that we'll be serving and that we'll be working with. We have been operating on very easy terms so far, and as we go further afield, it's only going to get harder as we introduce ourselves to different financial cultures, different money cultures than our own. And this is so exciting from the perspective of a designer, because these challenges they get so much harder, so much knottier. There are so many different cases that you wouldn't think about. And I do realize now that I put this number up here. This is the percentage of the worldwide adult population that has a Monzo account. I realize now it comes across a little bit global domination-y, and that's not what I mean. But what I'm trying to highlight is actually a sense of scale. We have achieved very little so far, and there is so much more for us to do to understand how we can make money work for everyone. Designing money across the world is an exercise in patience and understanding the things that we do and the things we don't know. And hopefully what we've illustrated today is that there is a lot we don't know, but that we will actually have quite a sound process for understanding if we are going the right direction or the wrong direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Xander. That was an incredible talk. Now, next up,